Snow whipped through the quiet streets of Burlington, Vermont that night, coating the world in white silence. From a small wooden house near the edge of town came a woman's furious scream, sharp enough to pierce through the storm. "Get out and take that picture with you." The door slammed. A 10-year-old girl stumbled into the snow, clutching a framed photo against her chest. Her name was Sarah Miller. The glass cracked beneath her shaking hands as she looked back at the dark windows that had once meant home. No light remained, only the cruel howl of wind and the crunch of her boots sinking deeper into the drift. Before the story begins, take a breath with me. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? Sometimes we all need a small reminder that kindness can still find us, even in the coldest storm. If your heart feels heavy, may this story bring you a little warmth. Sarah's breath came in clouds. She whispered into the storm dad, "Please tell me what to do." The photograph slipped from her arms and landed face down in the snow, half buried beneath the swirling frost. Her small body trembled. Her tears froze before they could fall. Far down the road, a pair of headlights appeared slicing through the blizzard. A black Cadillac slowed to a halt beside the church steps. Inside sat Ethan Carter, 32, a successful businessman returning from a late meeting. He almost didn't notice the figure curled up by the gate, a child in a torn coat clutching something close to her heart. He stopped the car. For a moment he just stared, memories flickering behind his tired eyes, a child he once couldn't save, a promise he'd never fulfilled. Then he stepped out into the snow. The wind tore at his coat as he approached. He knelt beside the girl and gently placed his jacket over her shoulders. "Hey," he said softly, his voice rough with cold and emotion. "No one deserves to freeze alone tonight." Sarah blinked up at him, lips blue, unable to answer. The photo frame glinted weakly beneath the snow, half broken, but still there. That was the night two lives, both lost in the cold, found the first spark of warmth again. The heater inside the Cadillac hummed quietly, filling the silence between them. Snow clung to the windows like frozen lace. Sarah sat in the back seat, her small hands wrapped around Ethan's coat, afraid that if she let go, the warmth would disappear. Ethan glanced at her through the mirror. "Are you cold?" She didn't answer, just nodded slightly. Her lips pressed together. Her boots were soaked, her fingers purple. He turned the car toward the only open place he could find, a small roadside diner, its neon sign flickering against the storm. Inside, the bell over the door chimed. Warm light, the scent of coffee, and the low murmur of the late-night waitress filled the space. Ethan led Sarah to a booth by the window and handed her a steaming cup of hot chocolate. She stared at it as if it were a miracle. When she finally took a sip, her shoulders relaxed just a little. No one in the diner asked questions. The few customers, a truck driver, an old couple, simply watched in quiet sympathy. Ethan waited until she'd finished half the cup before speaking. "What's your name, Sarah?" she whispered. "Sarah Miller." Her voice was soft, but the name carried weight, as if she had said it to remind herself that she still existed. He nodded. "And your parents?" Her fingers tightened around the mug. "Dad, he's gone." Her eyes shimmered, the reflection of the neon light trembling across her tears. "He died last month. My stepmom said. She said I didn't belong anymore. She said I was bad luck." Ethan stayed silent. He didn't press her for details. He knew too well how fragile the truth could sound when spoken aloud for the first time. Instead, he slid a small plate toward her, a slice of apple pie still warm from the oven. Sarah blinked as if unsure she was allowed to eat it. "You can have it," he said gently. "No one's going to take it away." Her fork clinked softly against the plate. For the first time, she ate without fear. Outside, snow still fell heavy, blanketing the parking lot. Inside the diner, the world seemed to pause, a pocket of warmth floating in the middle of a storm. Ethan watched the girl's reflection in the window. Her hair clung to her cheeks, her eyes deep with exhaustion. In that fragile stillness, he saw himself years ago, another child shivering in the dark, waiting for someone who never came. He looked away, swallowing hard. "Sarah," he said finally, "you'll stay somewhere safe tonight. I'll make sure of it." She lifted her head, uncertain but hopeful. "Promise." He hesitated, then nodded. "I promise." The storm outside roared again, but inside the small diner, a fragile sense of safety bloomed, the first warmth either of them had felt in a very long time. Later that night, Ethan parked his Cadillac outside the Lakeside Inn. The storm had softened, but the streets still glimmered under a sheet of frost. He turned off the engine and looked at the small figure asleep in the back seat. Sarah's cheek rested against the window, her tiny hands gripping his coat like a lifeline. Every now and then she shivered in her sleep, whispering something that sounded like a name Dad. He hesitated before waking her. The faint glow from the street lamp lit her face, pale and fragile lashes still damp from tears. Something about that sight pierced the quiet armor he'd built over the years. Ethan lifted her gently and carried her inside. The innkeeper behind the counter blinked at the sight, a man in a tailored coat hair, dusted with snow, holding a sleeping girl in his arms. Ethan simply said 2 rooms, next to each other. His tone left no space for questions. When the door closed behind them, the room fell into silence. A heater hummed low. Ethan placed Sarah on the bed and pulled a blanket over her. Her hand finally released his coat, resting lightly atop the soft fabric. For a moment, he just stood there, watching her breathe. Because once long ago, he had watched another child take her last breath. Lily, his daughter, 5 years old. A heart defect they couldn't cure, no matter how many doctors, no matter how much money. He remembered the sterile hospital room, the snow falling behind the window, and the moment the monitor flatlined. He had held her tiny hand until it grew cold. Since that day, winter had never ended for him. Ethan sat down in the chair by the window, eyes fixed on the swirling snow outside. "Maybe this is your way of giving me one more chance," he whispered to the night, though he wasn't sure who he was talking to, Lily God, or just the silence that had followed him for years. A rustle came from the bed. Sarah stirred, half awake. "Are you still here?" she asked faintly. "Yes," Ethan said. Her eyes blinked open, frightened but hopeful. "People always leave. When it gets quiet, they go." He froze, the words slicing through him. Slowly, he leaned forward. "I'm not going anywhere tonight, Sarah. You can sleep." She looked at him for a long moment before whispering, "Okay." Her eyelids fluttered shut again, her breathing evening out. Ethan stayed beside her, unmoving, until dawn's light began to creep through the curtains. The snow outside had stopped leaving the town, wrapped in a clean white stillness. He gazed at the faint sun breaking over the rooftops and made a silent vow. Whatever storms might come, this child would never face them alone. He adjusted the blanket one last time and whispered, You're safe now. And for the first time in years, the ice inside his chest began to melt. Across town, inside a spacious house on Maple Street, Catherine Miller sat by the fireplace, swirling red wine in her glass. The flames reflected on her diamond bracelet, but her eyes were colder than the snow outside. Mark, her boyfriend, leaned lazily on the couch, scrolling through listings on his phone. Once the sale goes through, he said, we'll finally be done with this rotten place. Florida, maybe. Somewhere without snow. Catherine smirked. I'm counting the days. Robert's house, his savings, all of it should have been mine years ago. Instead, I had to play stepmother to his perfect little angel. Mark chuckled. You did more than play. You made her disappear. Catherine turned sharply. I told her to leave, that's all. She wanted to go anyway, always whining about her dead father. She sipped her wine, pretending indifference. She'll come crawling back to someone else soon enough. Kids like her always do. But even as she said it, a flicker of unease crossed her face. She stood, walked to the window, and stared into the blizzard. Snow piled high on the driveway, covering the small footprints that had vanished hours ago. Mark, she said quietly, what if someone finds her? He laughed. In this weather, no one's out there. Besides, once I get the paperwork from the lawyer, we can put the house in your name. The sooner we sell, the better. She hesitated. The will. Robert's will it listed Sarah as the heir. That's what the old lawyer told me before he quit. Mark's tone hardened. Then we forged the new one. Ortega's already preparing the documents. By the time anyone checks, it'll be too late. Catherine's eyes glimmered at the name. Luis Ortega. That crooked lawyer you mentioned. Exactly. He's done this before. Once he stamps it, you'll be the rightful owner. For a moment, the only sound was the hiss of firewood. Then from outside, a faint siren echoed through the night. Catherine turned toward it instinctively. Do you think Mark waved it off? Probably a car stuck in snow. Stop worrying. The kid's gone. But her fingers twitched. Deep down, she wasn't sure. She poured another glass, watching the red liquid swirl like gilt in crystal. She looked just like him, she murmured under her breath. The same eyes. Mark didn't answer. He had moved on to a call with Ortega, his voice low but sharp. Make sure the signatures match. No mistakes. We'll wire your payment tomorrow. Outside, the storm began to quiet. The house stood still, warm light flickering behind frosted glass. A cruel contrast to the little girl who'd once called it home. And miles away, in a quiet inn-room, Ethan Carter woke at dawn with a growing sense that this was far from over. He didn't yet know it, but the battle for justice had just begun. The next morning, Burlington lay under a blanket of white silence. The snow had stopped, but the sky remained a pale, aching grey. Inside the small room at the lakeside inn, Ethan sat by the window, scrolling through his phone, while Sarah quietly drew shapes on the fogged glass, with her finger circles stars and finally a shaky heart. Do you remember your old house? He asked gently. She nodded. It's on Maple Street, near the big tree that looks like a hand. Her voice trembled. Dad built the swing himself. Ethan glanced up. Would you like to go there, just to see it from outside? Her eyes widened, unsure if she dared to hope. Then she nodded again. An hour later, they stood across the street from the Miller house. From behind the half-frozen windshield, Ethan could see smoke rising from the chimney. The warm glow behind the curtains made the cold outside feel crueler. Sarah pressed her hand to the glass. That's where I used to wait for him, every night. Through the window, Catherine and Mark moved about casually as if nothing had happened. Sarah's lips quivered. She threw away Dad's things. She said he didn't care about me anymore. Ethan's jaw tightened. Something in the pit of his stomach stirred the same fury that had once driven him to fight for a lost cause. He started the car. We're going to meet someone, Sarah. By noon, they sat inside an old brick office on Main Street. The brass plate on the door read Thomas Hale, Attorney at Law. Thomas, grey-haired and weary, greeted Ethan with a handshake. Haven't seen you since New York. What brings you here? Ethan nodded towards Sarah. It's about her father, Robert Miller. Do you still have his files? Thomas frowned, glancing at the girl. I handled his will years ago, but after his death, his widow asked for a transfer. Something felt off. He rummaged through a cabinet, pulling out a faded folder tied with string. This, he said, handing it to Ethan, is the original will. I kept a certified copy just in case. Ethan unfolded the pages carefully. The ink was faint, but the line was clear. To my daughter, Sarah Miller, I leave the family house, all remaining savings and full rights to my personal trust. His hands tightened around the document. She's the rightful heir, he murmured. Thomas sighed. If Catherine has filed new papers, she must have forged them. I've seen it before, greedy step-parents, using grief to hide their tracks. Sarah sat silently, holding her father's cracked photograph. Her small voice broke the heavy quiet. He said he'd keep me safe. Ethan turned to her. He still will, Sarah, just not the way you expected. Thomas nodded gravely. You'll need proof that Catherine faked the new will. The bank records the notary's stamp, all of it. Ethan's expression hardened. Then that's what I'll find. Outside, the wind began to pick up again, swirling flakes against the window. Sarah looked up at Ethan. Are we going to fight her? He smiled faintly, not with pride, but with certainty. We're not fighting her, Sarah. We're fighting for what's right. For the first time, she smiled back, small, fragile, but real. In that moment, under the grey Burlington sky, Ethan knew the path ahead would be long. But he also knew something else. This time, he wasn't fighting for redemption alone. He was fighting for a child's home, and for justice that would finally find its voice. By the end of that week, the peace in Burlington was gone. What had begun as a quiet act of kindness now spread across town like wildfire, twisted by rumours, fueled by spite. It started with a post on a local gossip page, Millionaire businessman, seen with missing girl questions arise. By nightfall, that single post had turned into headlines on cheap tabloids. Photos of Ethan carrying Sarah into the inn, taken by someone across the street, were now plastered online, cropped and captioned to tell a lie. At the Miller house, Catherine scrolled through her phone with a satisfied smirk. Beside her, Mark grinned. See, the city eats up stories like this. You're not just the grieving stepmother anymore, you're the victim. Catherine chuckled, sipping her coffee. And he's the monster who kidnapped a little girl. Perfect. She glanced at the newspaper on the table, her own tear-streaked photo staring back under the headline, Stepmother pleads for the safe return of her late husband's daughter. I almost believe myself, she whispered, admiring her handiwork. Across town, Ethan sat in the diner again, the same booth where Sarah had first tasted hot chocolate. Now, the waitress avoided eye contact. A man at another table whispered something to his wife. Ethan felt their stares like frost on his skin. The bell over the door jingled, and Thomas Hale hurried in, holding a folded newspaper. "Ethan," he said in a low voice, "you've become the town's villain overnight. Catherine hired a PR firm. They're framing you as a kidnapper." Ethan leaned back, his jaw tightening. "So she's faster than I thought." Thomas nodded. "If this keeps spreading, you could face an investigation before the trial even starts." Sarah, sitting beside him, looked up with frightened eyes. "Did we do something wrong?" Ethan turned to her quickly. "No, Sarah. Don't ever think that. We told the truth. That's what matters." But even as he spoke, he could feel the weight of the lie pressing in from every direction. Outside, a group of reporters had begun to gather. Camera flashes broke through the diner windows like bursts of lightning. The waitress approached nervously. "Sir, maybe you should leave before it gets worse." Ethan nodded and took Sarah's hand. As they slipped out the back door, one photographer caught a blurry shot of them hurrying into the car, a photo that would become tomorrow's front page. That night, Ethan's phone rang. An unfamiliar voice came through, sharp and confident. "Mr. Carter, this is Vanessa Ortiz, attorney for Mrs. Catherine Miller. I suggest you return the girl immediately before charges escalate." Ethan's tone was calm, but iron-edged. "If your client wants to talk, she can meet me in court." "Court," Vanessa laughed. "By the time you get there, your reputation will be ash." "Good night, Mr. Carter." The line went dead. Ethan sat in silence, staring at the city lights outside his hotel window. In the next room, Sarah was asleep, clutching the repaired photograph of her father. He whispered to himself, "They can twist the story, but they can't erase the truth." And for the first time, his reflection in the glass didn't look like a man haunted by failure, but a man ready to fight. The courthouse in downtown Burlington was packed. Reporters lined the steps, flashes cutting through the cold March air. Inside, silence fell as Ethan Carter sat beside Sarah Miller, her small hands gripping her chair. Across the aisle, Catherine Miller, dressed in black, hid behind a mask of sorrow. "Case number 2347, the clerk called. "Guardianship of Sarah Miller and the authenticity of Robert Miller's will. Thomas Hale, Ethan's attorney, rose. Your Honor, we present evidence that Mrs. Miller forged her late husband's will to seize his property and remove his daughter from inheritance." A ripple moved through the courtroom. "Vanessa Ortiz." Catherine's lawyer replied coolly, "These claims are emotional fiction. Mrs. Miller only sought to protect a runaway child." Thomas held up a sealed folder. "This is the original will, notarized by myself and Mr. Miller's accountant." On the projection screen, two signatures appeared, one real, one fake. "Notice the R, Your Honor. The forgery was filed 6 weeks after Robert Miller's death." "Objection," Vanessa barked. "Overruled," the judge said. Thomas continued. "We also have testimony from the notary whose stamp was stolen. She never signed Catherine's version." Catherine shifted in her seat color, draining from her face. "Mrs. Miller," the judge said evenly, "is there anything you wish to say?" She clenched her jaw. "I was protecting the estate. That girl, she's unstable." "Address the facts," the judge cut in. Thomas turned. "Your Honor, we call Sarah Miller to the stand." The room stilled. The bailiff lifted Sarah into the witness chair. Her feet barely touched the floor. Thomas knelt to meet her eyes. "Sarah, tell us what happened that night." Her voice shook, but she spoke. "She told me to get out. She threw my dad's photo. I ran into the snow and..." I thought maybe if I held it tight, he'd find me. The courtroom went silent. Even the reporters stopped writing. And who found you instead? Thomas asked. Sarah looked at Ethan. He did. The judge adjusted his glasses. Then came the sound everyone waited for, the gavel. This court recognizes Sarah Miller as the lawful heir. Mrs. Catherine Miller and Mr. Mark Ellis will be investigated for fraud and child endangerment. Catherine shouted, "You can't do this," but the bailiff was already beside her. Ethan knelt beside Sarah. "It's over," he whispered. "You did it." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, forgiving, as Burlington finally felt clean. The storm had long passed, but Burlington still carried that quiet hush that follows justice, the kind that feels like a prayer whispered across snow. A week after the trial, Ethan Carter drove slowly up Maple Street. The road was clean now, the white fences gleaming under morning sun. In the back seat, Sarah pressed her face to the window. Her breath fogged the glass as the familiar shape of her old house came into view, the house her father built. For a moment, neither spoke. The tires crunched softly against the gravel as Ethan stopped the car. The house looked smaller now, emptied of noise and cruelty. Curtains fluttered where Catherine's angry shadow once stood. Ethan turned the key, cutting the engine. "We don't have to go in right away," he said gently. But Sarah was already unbuckling her seatbelt. She opened the door and stepped out, her boots sinking into the thin crust of snow. The cold air bit at her cheeks, but she didn't flinch. She walked towards the porch, holding the framed photo of her father. Now repaired, the glass replaced the wood, polished. Ethan followed a few steps behind. When she reached the front door, Sarah paused, her small hand hovering above the doorknob. Her voice trembled. "Can I open it?" He nodded. The key turned easily. The door creaked open with a sigh, as if the house itself had been holding its breath. Dust floated in the air like faint ghosts of memory. The sunlight spilled through the windows, touching every corner, the mantel, the stairs. The family photos still hanging crooked on the wall. Sarah stepped inside slowly. "It smells the same," she whispered. She placed her father's picture on the fireplace mantel right where it used to be. Her fingers brushed the frame tenderly. "I kept it safe, Dad." "I didn't let them take it." Ethan watched from the doorway. Something inside him softened, a quiet recognition that he had not only saved a child, but found a piece of himself again. Sarah turned toward him, smiling through her tears. "Can we stay here for a while?" Ethan nodded. "As long as you want." They spent the rest of the day cleaning, sweeping the floor, opening windows, folding old blankets. The scent of lemon soap and fresh air replaced the stale cold. By late afternoon, a small fire burned in the hearth, and the house began to feel alive again. When evening came, Sarah sat cross-legged on the rug, writing in a notebook Ethan had bought her. She drew the outline of the house and two stick figures, one tall, one small, standing beneath a tree. She looked up shyly. "That's you and me." Ethan smiled. "Then we should add the light," he said, taking a crayon and drawing a yellow sun above them. Outside, the last snowflakes of winter drifted down, soft, harmless, almost tender. Inside, warmth returned to a place that had forgotten what home felt like. And in that quiet living room, with laughter flickering between firelight and memory, Ethan finally understood he hadn't just rescued Sarah. He had rescued himself too. 1 year later, Burlington woke to the first bloom of spring. The snow had melted, leaving the town washed clean, and the sound of birds replaced the winter silence that once hung over Maple Street. The old Miller house looked different now. The walls had been painted a soft cream, the garden bursting with tulips and small wildflowers Sarah had planted herself. A new wooden sign hung on the porch rail, carved carefully by hand, the Miller Haven. Inside, laughter filled the rooms. Two neighborhood children chased each other through the hallway, their shoes squeaking against the polished floor. Ethan stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup while Sarah helped set the table. She wore a yellow sweater, a gift from him, and her hair was braided neatly down her back. There was colour in her cheeks, again the kind that comes only from peace. Ethan glanced toward the living room where the fireplace now held more than one photograph. Beside Robert Miller's old frame were new pictures of Sarah at school, of her painting, in the yard of both of them, smiling in front of the courthouse on the day the adoption papers were signed. When the children left that evening, Sarah closed the door and leaned against it, watching the sunset glow spill through the window. "Dad would have liked this house now," she said softly. Ethan looked at her. "He'd be proud of you." She smiled. "And you." He set down his cup and nodded. "You gave me back my heart, Sarah. I didn't think anyone could." Outside, the wind carried the scent of new blossoms across the porch. Sarah lit a small lamp by the window, a habit she had kept since that night in the snow. As the room filled with golden light, she whispered the words that had once ended her nightmares. "No more dark." Ethan turned off the stove and joined her by the window. Together they watched the street fade into twilight, two souls once lost, now home at last. On the mantel, Robert Miller's photograph caught the glow of the lamp. His smile, frozen in time, seemed warmer than ever. And beneath it, engraved into the wood, were the words Ethan had chosen for this new beginning. Family is not bound by blood, but by the hearts that choose to stay. In moments of pain like Sarah's, or in the quiet courage to stand up again, like Ethan's, have you ever seen a spark of kindness change someone's life? Have you ever watched injustice fall apart under the light of truth? If there's a Sarah somewhere near you, a child, a friend, or even a stranger carrying silent hurt, what small thing could you do today to ease her fear? Tell us in the comments below, because sometimes a single sentence from you might be the light guiding someone who's still lost in the cold. And before we close, how are you? Did this story touch something in you? A memory, a promise, a warmth you'd almost forgotten? If your day feels a little heavy, I hope this ending reminded you that even after the longest winter, the snow always melts, and light always finds its way home. Our channel will always be here to listen, to share stories that heal, stories that remind us that compassion is never wasted. So please leave a comment and share this video so more hearts can feel this warmth too.